If you're not familiar with Dante's Inferno, it's an epic poem written in the 14th century by the Italian writer Dante Alighieri. It describes Dante himself journeying through the depths of hell, guided by the soul of the Roman poet Virgil, who lived a full 13 centuries before Dante. The poem itself was not accepted by the Catholic Church at the time, but you can think of it as the ultimate Bible fan fiction of its day. In 2021, the Italian studio Acheron Books published Inferno, Dante's Guide to Hell after a successful Kickstarter. They used the D&D 5e rules to create an entire campaign that tracked the path of the literary Dante through the 9 circles of hell. That's what this video is about. I just want to say from the outset that this supplement is sort of mind-blowing in that I think it actually pulled it off. Much like their more recent 5e supplement Apocalypse, which I reviewed on this channel, and which puts you smack in the middle of the New Testament's Book of Revelation, Inferno is very heavily researched, and the actual connective tissue between the setting and 5e rules are sound. The fact that it's using 5e rules means you're not just going to waltz through hell the way that Dante's character did, though. This supplement is about fighting and outsmarting your way through hell, and it gets pretty interesting, as you'll see. Acheron's Inferno supplement is essentially 2 books that present you the new rules and the campaign itself, and a third optional book that presents Dante's original poem in Italian and English, along with all the jaw-dropping illustrations that you see in the first 2 books. Couple of points before we jump in. First, this video is sponsored, but as always, I'm going to give you my honest opinion about this supplement. I do have some quibbles here and there that I'll let you know about throughout the video. The second is that you can get 20% off of the books at the Acheron website using the code Thaumavore20. I'll leave links to their store down below. Let's actually take a look at these books in their physical form before we dive into the actual content. The first of the 3 books, entitled Inferno, Dante's Guide to Hell, is a relatively slim volume. Due to the high quality cover stock, it feels like a really overbuilt tome for its 187 pages. But I'm not really complaining. It's nice in the hand and has vibrant color pages. By the way, you can buy each of these books separately from the Acheron website or as a bundle that comes with a DM screen. This first book covers the player side of things for this setting, the special rules for hope and divine inspiration, as well as all the playable archetypes. It also covers an overview of the 9 circles of hell in a fairly detailed way, but not in nearly as much detail as the second book. The second book is called Inferno, Virgilio's Untold Tales. This is a meatier book at 243 pages that feels more justified in its ultra deluxe feeling cover. The book itself is a campaign that can take place in this setting, but to be honest, it's kind of the only campaign that can take place in this setting, where you traverse through the 9 circles of hell and make your way through to the other side, fighting and scheming your way 5e style. The third book is entitled Inferno Divine Commedia, and it's simply the original epic poem by Dante Alighieri, written in the Italian in 1314 as one of a 3-part anthology that also included the poems Purgatory and Paradise. The trio of poems was called the Divine Comedy, and the term comedy at the time didn't mean something funny. It just meant any story in which the main characters reach triumph or narrative victory in the end, as opposed to a tragedy where characters meet defeat, downfall, or death at the end. Anyway, you get an English translation in this tome, a classic translation by none other than Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and probably most remarkably, you get illustrations by some very talented artists who work with Two Little Mice, the publisher that brought you Broken Compass, Household, and Outgunned. Altogether, the 3 tomes comprise a tidy, high-quality addition to your bookshelf, but let's take an actual look inside these first 2 books to see what the setting and adventure have to offer. It says here, Inferno isn't just a setting, but rather the attempt to create a unique and deeply affecting experience. I wasn't sure about this statement at first, but it's kind of true. The actual reality in Dante's Hell is so psycho-spiritual and dreamlike in nature that it really does end up being more than just a romp through hell with 5e combat rules. There are some ground rules to this setting. The first one is, you play as a lost one. No matter what your character was in life, they are now a re-embodied soul appearing in a dark forest, and they are effectively human. I really appreciate this stipulation because I'm personally not a big fan of all the exotic and mismatched species in brand-named D&D 5e. Those are all thrown out here. You're human, or at least your metacorporeal form here in hell appears to be human. The Lost One is actually treated as a new race or species. if you will, for the sake of the mechanics. And it's not clear if you're fully solid matter or just an apparition appearing in hell, but in terms of the hard numbers, here they are here. One notable feature is that you are, quote, midway upon the journey of your life, which is something pulled straight out of the source material. And you can't really remember everything or everyone about your past. You mostly only recall your sins. And here's a big one. You don't require air, food, or drink, or sleep. For a long rest, you just need to sit still for however many hours. This is an interesting mechanic because it throws food and water logistics out the window. This is not that kind of setting. It's trying to do something other than simulate dungeon delving. Here's another big tweak to the rules. Any material component for a spell without a cost or whose cost is less than 500 gold pieces is not required and can be ignored to cast spells. Spells with a cost higher than 500 GP might cost exhaustion or huge gobs of hit points. So like with air, food, and water, the whole concept of spell components is right out the window. You also start with 2 minor blessings and 1 major blessing. The minor blessings are pretty powerful, such as dark vision, being able to roll with advantage on resisting being frightened, which is kind of a big deal in this particular version of Hell, or picking up 2 extra cantrips. Major blessings include resistance to necrotic and radiant damage, among other battle-related options. As far as alignment, whatever it was in your previous life no longer matters. You are defined by a single grave sin, which is encapsulated by an archetype. The player's experience can be funneled into one of 12 archetypes, each of which is more or less a class. Check this out, quote, "It is not possible to play any type of class or subclass other than these 12 archetypes unless using the variant character types found in Virgilio's Untold Tales." Those 3 bonus archetypes, by the way, in the Untold Tales book, are also firmly based on character types found in Dante's Inferno, which is to say, the setting is a walled garden. So first of all, no tabaxi or elves, and here it says none of your bog standard D&D classes. Here's what you get. This table is in some ways the heart of the player experience. Whichever archetype you pick, you tie yourself to a core sin, and with that sin comes a circle of hell where you are particularly weak in. The idea in the fiction is that as you pass through that particular circle of hell, hell itself is trying to keep you there forever. Your job, of course, is to keep on trucking. Instead of selecting backgrounds that you would normally do in 5e, you would select or roll for 2 virtues and 2 vices from these tables. If you roleplay these virtues and vices faithfully at the table, the DM or guide should award you a metacurrency called Divine Inspiration, which is just like vanilla 5e inspiration. And speaking of metacurrency, there is hope, which is by far the most important and central currency of the game. Hope is something that your character has and which the millions or billions of denizens trapped in hell do not have. It's the stuff that allows you to keep moving forward in hell. But if you lose hope each time your body dies, and you can also spend hope on a variety of things like special abilities, you may eventually be stuck in hell forever. The minute you lose your last point of hope, your character is forfeit. You start with 33 hope points and can gain and give them away with some frequency throughout your journey. So I'm not going to go through all 12 archetypes in the setting. I'll just touch on a couple, starting with the Beast, which is your barbarian stand-in. As mentioned, each archetype is defined by their primary sin in life. For the Beast, it is wrath, which you might also recognize as one of the 7 deadly sins that comes up a lot in ancient Christian fanfic. The 5th circle of hell is reserved for those who committed wrath during life, and they are meant to wallow in the mud of the river Styx and fight with everyone around them forever. As with all archetypes, you physically appear as the embodiment of your sin, bearing your punishment as well. In the case of the Beast, you're covered in mud and dirt, and your face is hidden behind the golden skull of a beast. In this setting, each character has so-called emblems. These are items and features that you can never lose. In the case of items, if you throw it away or destroy it, it simply reappears right back in your possession. The Beast has a brutal weapon, a feature called Unchecked Might, and the feature of Mud that helps you resist cold and fire damage and slip away from being grappled. Each of these emblems also has 3 levels to them, and they individually get leveled up at certain character levels. At levels 13 and 19, the emblems walk their way up to Damned status, wherein your character is really powerful, usually almost always in terms of combat-related abilities, either passive or active. The other major component of every archetype is what in this case is called the Path, of which there's always just one. It's kind of a shame to skip by so many of these archetypes, if only because I want to show you all the jaw-dropping illustrations and cool play concepts. But here's another one, the Illuminatus. This is the setting's wizard, and their great sin is that they hoarded things, whether it be riches, secrets, or knowledge of relics. They are destined to spend eternity in the fourth circle of hell, consigned to pushing huge boulders around with others. Your appearance is that of someone overburdened with heavy baubles and trinkets, and you wear a face of meanness and greed. As far as spells, casters in this setting do get a smattering of spells from the SRD, and they're always listed under their original class. But you also get a unique school or path or whatever it's called for that class. In the case of the Illuminatus, it's a variety of magic-related features that kick in as you level up. Since this is a setting based on D&D 5e, the mechanics here really can read a little bit dry, such as canny defense. No matter how metaphysical or psycho-spiritual the setting wants to get, if you're using 5e, you might just find yourself tallying up saving throws equal to 1/3 of your highest spell slot available, rounded down. So the interesting thing about the second half of this book, which details the 9 circles of hell, is that it's sort of a spoiler for the campaign itself, which is to say, this is a singular campaign loaded with all kinds of surprises if you've never read the original poem by Dante. But the level of detail in this book, despite being about 80 pages of description, pales in comparison to the level of detail provided to DMs in the second book. I'll try to preserve the greater details and just go over the general contours of hell in this video. As you can see, Dante's Hell is a funnel-shaped chasm that is supposed to be located at the center of Earth, with Lucifer, or Lucifero as he's referred to, at the center. Souls end up in hell for a variety of reasons, and that's good for you as a player because you can come up with something interesting to mesh with your character's backstory. They could be there to question a soul or deliver a message or fulfill some prophecy, or they could have just wandered in there. The way that the Inferno is described in the original poem is very dreamlike, so to stay faithful to the source material, time and space in this setting are pretty much amorphous. There might be millions or billions of souls in an area, but they will all fit because an area will expand as needed. One thing that I thought was kind of funny was this line, quote, "Fighting in hell is a distraction or a way to buy time. Do not rely on violence to proceed." That's told to you in the context of the fact that your body will always regenerate if you're killed down here in hell, but the fact is, the setting is couched in 5e rules, and really, so much of it is about combat. Even the archetype options and features provided in this actual setting are combat focused. But I think that's the fun of it. It's Dante's Inferno, but some crazy over-the-top high fantasy rated R violent action version where you fight your way through. At least sometimes. You really do have to outsmart your way out of some obstacles, no doubt. The Dolorous people is the name given to the countless souls dwelling down in hell who don't have any hope. The lower they are in hell, the worse their sin was in life, at least according to Dante Alighieri's moral compass. One interesting thing here is that you are more likely to meet a soul who recognize you than not. It's not really crazy coincidence that you'll keep running into people you know down in hell, despite there being countless souls down there. It's more of a feature. Hell here is not a physical place as much as it's a metaphysical playground built around your own character's mind. If that sounds confusing, it's because it is. So when you start down your journey into hell, you always start in the Dark Forest, which is technically outside of hell, but from which there is already no escape. You run into the Forest Keepers, a panther, a lion, and a she-wolf, and there are stats for these creatures in the second book, but needless to say, you either fight them or outrun or outsmart them somehow to move forward. Then you reach a stone gate that contains the infamous phrase, "All hope abandon, ye who enter in." But obviously don't abandon hope, that's like your most important meta currency in the game. Here's a good map of the first area. You can see the Dark Forest on the left. You go through the gates of hell, there's this Antinferno area, then you have to cross this red river called the Acheronte. And there's that name again. The company that publishes this setting, as well as Brancalonia, Lex Arcana, and Apocalypsa, is named Acheron. There's only one way to cross the river, and that's on the ferry piloted by the giant Carante Demonio. You can't fight your way through this one. It's a social encounter where you have to ingratiate yourself to this guy who is actually pretty rude and says lots of mean things to everyone. So after you cross, you're in the first circle of hell called Limbo. And it's actually the swanky circle of hell, where people's only sin was that they were not baptized before they died. They all still hold a spark of so-called divine flame, and they live in luxury. If and when you're ready to descend into the second circle of hell, you have to face Minosa, a keeper of hell. These keepers show up at every circle, really a lot like mini-bosses in a video game, and it's sort of a perfect setup for an RPG. In the case of Minosa, you have to figure out his favorite topic to discuss, and it actually tells you right here in this book what it is. So that's another social encounter. After getting past him, you will find yourself in a pretty nice citadel, really the only built-up semblance of civilization in all of hell. So actually I'm going to stop here, because otherwise this video would run for 2 or 3 hours. Each level of hell is described in this fashion, sort of acquainting you with the weirdness and the geography, if you want to call it that. One more thing. Look at that artwork, by the way, it's just incredible. One more thing I'd want to point out about hell is that a lot of the threats you'll face along the way are environmental. For example, in the second circle of hell here, there's a constant hurricane that engulfs the entire circle. You have to deal with getting thrashed by wind and rain as you deal with other threats. At least one archetype has buffs specifically against these environmental hazards, and that's a pretty big deal. So if you're rolling up a character here, don't dismiss those. Okay, one last circle of hell, the third circle, which is, quote, a vast basin of mire, an unstable, sloping crag traversed by constant landslides and avalanches, beaten upon by rain and hailstorms reaching down from the hurricane, swarming with crawling souls beneath the merciless rain. So the weather doesn't lighten up all the way down here, and you'll eventually face the fourth keeper, Cerbero, who continuously whips and tears apart souls who are damned for being gluttonous in life. They're sort of stuck in the mud and can never escape. That's another feature of this hell, by the way, the creative ways in which the damned are eternally punished. In the end, if you can make it through 9 circles of hell and a Lucifer that stands about 300 feet tall from the waist up, you make your way out of the other side of the earth and emerge to see the stars once more. But that's only if you're a completionist. Let's pop over to the second book, where I can show you a few really interesting bonus character options that sort of break the mold here. Virgilio's Untold Tales serves as the GM's guide and campaign book for this whole setting, and it's quite long and detailed. That's Lucifero on the cover, by the way. The bottom of the 9th circle of hell is a frozen lake, and he's stuck in the middle of it because when he got cast down from heaven, he was shot downward so hard that he got permanently planted right there in the lake. Just as an overview of this book, you can see here that there are 4 sections. The first are these 3 bonus archetypes that I mentioned, and I'll go over each of those. The second is a discussion of what you can do as the guide, and then a very detailed walkthrough of the campaign, which tracks the original poem but adds the gamified encounter stuff that you'd expect in an RPG campaign. And finally, the stats for each of the monsters and creatures you'd face along the way. I'm not going to spoil any of the specifics of the journey itself in this video, aside from what I've already revealed. The single most fascinating proposition in this book to me is that the DM or guide plays a character who acts as the guide to the party, in the way that Virgil walked along Dante as his guide in the original story. But here's the thing, and this might actually be a major spoiler, but it's something that you can change and tweak as needed. The author suggests that the guide's NPC be the secret driving force behind the whole expedition. They suggest that the guide is actually Orfeo, another lost one who called up the PCs at the Dark Forest because he needed them in order to get through hell and rescue his beloved Eurydice. They also suggest that you could be some other PC with some other ulterior motive, or you could even just run the game straight without all that subplot. But I was really impressed with this idea of injecting an overarching secret objective into the guide's NPC. So anyway, there are 3 outlier player archetypes offered in this book that are each pretty interesting. The Indifferent Angels, the Malebranche, and Noble Spirits. The one thing that they have in common is that they're all already denizens of hell. It's almost a problem for the DM because players are supposed to start in the Dark Forest, which is outside of hell, but these 3 archetypes can't actually leave hell. So you have to bend the rules a bit to get a party to all start in the forest together if any of the players are playing one of these archetypes. The first of them is the Indifferent Angel, who was cast into hell for not picking a side in the big holy war between God and Lucifer. They are supposedly bound to the area between the main gate to hell and the river Acarante, but if you're playing as one, obviously you can walk around anywhere you want. Just like with all playable characters in this setting, you have hope points, you don't need air, food, or water, and you level up from 1 to 20, and pick up features all along the way. But in this case, you're 10 feet tall and you have wings, but can't fly. You also have a system of expendable dice called Indifference dice, and they're D8s, which are used mostly for combat-related abilities. For example, you can roll them to reduce incoming damage, or tweak a saving throw result, or heal wounds. Your emblems, or permanent magic items and features, are a Veil of Indifference, which increases your attack damage somehow, Haunting Insects, which you can sick on enemies, and a Shield of Indifference, which boosts your non-magical damage resistance. Malabranch are jobber devils usually found in the 8th circle. Somehow, if one of them acquires Hope, and that's Hope with a capital H, then they can be a playable character. I think the funniest thing about this archetype is the name suggestions, all taken from the original poem. They're all Italian names. I don't know why I find that funny. Just like the Indifferent Angels, the Malabranch have a pool of expendable D8s called Damnation dice, and they are expended to add damage to attacks, for the most part. Your emblems are a golden skeleton that gives you resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing, and Weapon of Damnation, which allows you to summon any kind of weapon you want in each hand, and which turn to ashes as soon as you drop them, and Wings of Sin, which give you the ability to fly. By the way, giving players the ability to fly is really hard on a DM because it empowers the players to solve all kinds of problems that they wouldn't normally be able to solve. The DM really has to step up their game to counteract flying. The third bonus archetype is the Noble Spirit, who are, quote, virtuous and flawless souls, celebrated in the world of the living for their grandeur, yet they never received the sacraments of the Lord and could not be saved. You appear in hell as you are remembered on earth, so if you were commemorated as a marble statue back on earth, that's how you would appear down here. Unlike all the other souls in hell, noble spirits aren't burdened by tortures, pain, or grief. They live in limbo, that swanky part of town that I mentioned earlier. This is the archetype I had in mind when I mentioned that some have buffs against environmental threats. The idea is that you as a noble spirit just know hell like the back of your hand, or at least you're a quick study. You're also a caster and cast with your wisdom modifier. As far as spells, you're sort of a cleric-y wizard from the looks of it. The actual campaign has a title, and it's called The Way is Long and Difficult the Road, which is a great name for a campaign. I honestly don't know how many sessions it would take to get a party through the 9 circles of hell, but I can say that a lot of the burden is on the DM. Let me just give you a taste of what the campaign materials look like. The general format is fairly long descriptions interspersed with bullet points that establish some axioms for a scene, and then excerpts from the original poem. The entire campaign is organized into cantos and stanzas pulled right out of the poem. And it's a long poem, so as the DM, you'd better buckle in for some serious reading. In the end, I think Inferno, Dante's Guide to Hell is the highest form of 5e setting, one that is intrinsically substantial because it's faithfully and exhaustively based on one of the greatest works of world literature. I guess to give it some context, let's compare something like this to a similar product, Descent into Avernus, an adventure in hell published by Wizards of the Coast in 2019. The concept in that campaign is that you journey through Avernus, the first layer of the 9 hells, and eventually face off against Archdevil Zariel. If all that sounds sort of counterfeit to you, like a dollar store Dante's Inferno, that's because it is. Honestly, I'd be perfectly fine with Descent into Avernus if it were streamlined and easy to run, but it's dense and challenging, just like Inferno, Dante's Guide to Hell. But what you get with Inferno here is the fact that it's so heavily based on the genuine article. Whosoever chooses to actually read all of this supplement and then take players through the entire campaign would become intimately familiar with Dante Alighieri's epic poem, and that's a life enhancement in my opinion. It's an asset and a privilege to know and understand classic literature, and if you're able to do it while playing or running an RPG, that's just a gift. Anyways, that's all I've got for now. Thanks as always for watching. If you have anything you'd like to share about Inferno, Dante's Guide to Hell, or the original poem itself, leave a comment down below. I've left links for everything in the description. See ya.